Imagine for a second you're in a relationship with somebody who, whenever you have a disagreement with them, they pretty much just blame you for the problem and refuse to take any responsibility for it. So in that case, in the future, if they ever have a grievance with you, then you're probably not going to take it seriously, because it's not that they actually want to solve that problem. It's instead that there's some other ulterior motive there, such as them wanting to shift the power or balance of the relationship in their favor, or they just never want to accept responsibility for anything. In other words, they don't have a whole lot of credibility in your eyes. So if you want to have credibility in situations like that and other similar ones, if you want people to willingly give you what you want and to respect you and take you seriously, then there are a number of things that you've got to do, a few of which I'm going to walk through in this video. So to have credibility, the first thing you've got to do is be selective about the times that you choose to say any given thing over and over again. Because quite simply, the more you say something, the less of an effect it has. Because if you say it in all sorts of different situations, then the only common denominator that could be left is some other reason under the surface than what you would want people to think it is for why you feel compelled to do that. So for example, let's say you're at a car dealership and you're checking out a car with a salesperson, and he says, "This is a great car and you're going to love it." And you might keep that in mind, but then let's say you go to the next car and he says the same thing. "Hey, this is a great car and you're going to love it." And he just keeps saying that for every car that you go and check out. So not only is that not very helpful, but also you're again going to start suspecting that this guy probably doesn't actually think that these cars are great and that I'm going to love them, but instead that there's another ulterior motive there, a common denominator, another reason that's compelling him to say that, which is that he just wants to sell me whatever car that he possibly can. Next, you must always be willing to admit when you're wrong or that you could be. Because if you're not, then every time that you say you're right, it's not because you actually are, it's just because you never want to be wrong. So nothing you say can really be taken seriously anymore, and the other person is going to take the burden of proof on themselves to question everything you say. Because you don't care about the truth, you just care about your ego and self-preservation. Number 3, if ever you make an assertion, then you have to provide the logical basis for why that assertion should be accepted as truth, rather than having an emotional basis for it, which is something like, if you don't believe me, then I'm just going to get upset. Because if you do that, then you're not proving that your assertion is true, and there's just as much evidence to suggest that it could be false. So for example, I recently watched an interview on YouTube of some college students on the subject of healthcare, and some of them said that they believe that we should just have free healthcare for everybody. And that was it. That was the extent of their argument. And so that leaves many lingering questions, such as, why do you think that that's the case? How do you propose we're going to make that happen? What happens to all the industries surrounding healthcare now that are privatized, that are going to collapse if we do that, such as insurance providers and private hospitals? How do you define free? Who's going to compensate all the healthcare providers, and how are we going to do that, etc.? And so without any of that evidence or that logic, there's no reason to change things from the way that they are now. It's not really a very convincing argument. And that's not even an active disagreement, it's just not an agreement, which is enough for your argument to fall flat. Now, sometimes part of being credible is expressing appreciation for the things you've already been given. Because if you don't do that, then whenever you ask for something, it's not because you have a good reason behind it, or you've done the math behind why you should be given that, and you're not making a really good case for it. Instead, it's just because you're greedy and you'll never be satisfied. So take, for example, people who condemn the country that they live in, saying things like, "I'm oppressed and I'm at a disadvantage," or "I deserve more," or "I want this or that." And they say all those things all while holding a very expensive coffee in one hand and a $1,000 smartphone in the other. And I can't help but look at that and say, you obviously have a lot going for you already, and you live in a country that gives you a lot of rights and privileges to begin with. And so if that's not good enough for you, then nothing ever really will be. So I can't really take your request seriously, because you're always just going to want more. Now, the willingness to compromise is also a very important aspect of credibility. So if ever you encounter a conflict of interest with somebody that you have some kind of relationship with, and you can't sacrifice just a little bit of what you want so that they can have some of what they want, and instead every solution you propose just revolves around you getting everything you want, especially at the expense of them, then what does that say about your motive? That you're just entirely selfish and you don't care about anybody else's needs but your own. And no one's going to want to sign up for a relationship like that. And for that same reason, the last item on the list here is that you can't have double standards. So if ever you have an expectation of other people, then you yourself have to be capable of and willing to meet that same expectation yourself. Because if you are, then that shows that your cause is legitimate. You actually believe in it, and there's a good reason for why you think we all should follow this standard. It's for the collective. It's for the greater good. Whereas if you're not, and you still expect other people to meet that standard, then again, what are you showcasing? That your motive is probably just to serve your own self-interest. So one final example, and possibly a little bit of a controversial one at that, is someone who, say, complains about the police, but then calls them whenever they need their help. And so what's the double standard there? That you shouldn't enjoy the protection of the police, but I should. And so that claim can't really be taken seriously because it's not designed for the reasons that they would have you think, which is for the greater good or some other higher cause, but instead, under the surface, it's just designed to benefit that person by making them look good to their friends or giving them something to complain about. Because it's a shape-shifting argument, one that takes on a certain form when it doesn't affect that person and then takes on a different one when it does. So overall, the less self-interested you are, the more credible you will be, because that's when you're going to care more about the truth and other people and the greater good than you do about yourself. So I hope this helps. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.